Hello, my name is Mary Kay, and I'm the pastor at Christ United Methodist Church in Napoleon, Ohio. This is the third message in a sermon series I'm calling Unshakable. And today I want to talk about what happens when your faith falters. And you know, no matter how strong a foundation of our faith is, I think we can all attest to the fact that there are times when something happens that causes us to question our faith and to question God. And a perfect example is this pandemic that we're going through right now. Some of you may be struggling with your faith as we go through COVID-19, and you may be wondering how God could let this happen. You may even be wondering whether God is using this pandemic to punish us all for things that we've done. I think that's a normal reaction that many of us go through during these times. But you know, we're not the only ones who struggle with trusting God in the midst of a crisis. Throughout history, throughout the Bible, in fact, we hear of people who doubted God, who felt that God had abandoned them, or who wondered why God would allow something bad to happen. In other words, their faith faltered, just like ours does from time to time. And one of those people was Gideon, whose story is told in the book of Judges in the Old Testament. Now, you may be familiar with his story, but if not, let me give you a little bit of background about him. If you remember, at some point in the years following their arrival in the Promised Land, many of the Israelites began to worship other gods. And they built idols to some of them, and they worshiped them instead of the one true God who had led them out of Egypt. Interestingly enough, though, when times got tough, these same people cried out to God, begging him to rescue them once again. And so from time to time, God would call on someone from one of the tribes to help save the people. These men were referred to as judges, and they were not only given the authority to administer justice, they also served as military leaders during times of war. Most people understood that these judges had been sent by God to help them. But unfortunately, once the Israelites knew they were saved from whatever predicament they were facing, they often went right back to worshiping other gods and idols. But eventually, a new crisis would arrive, so they turned to God once again for help, and once again God would call on someone to help save them. And there was almost a cyclical pattern to this, because the book of Judges mentions 12 different men who served as judges. Well, Gideon was one of those judges, and we first hear of him in Judges 6. In the beginning of that passage, we're told that God wasn't happy that many of the Israelites were worshiping other gods. So for 7 years, he let the Midianites invade their land and oppress the Israelites by ruining their crops and slaughtering their livestock. And the Israelites eventually became so fearful of the Midianites that they scattered, and they hid out in the mountains and in caves. And at one point, though, as was their usual pattern, the Israelites cried out to God, begging him to save them. Now, even though God was angry with the Israelites, he had a plan, once again, to take care of them. And so God sent an angel to talk to a man named Gideon, who was out threshing wheat in a wine press in order to keep it away from the Midianites. The angel sat down near a tree where Gideon was working and told him that the Lord was with him. Now, Gideon was naturally a bit skeptical. In Judges 6:13, we hear that he said to the angel, "Pardon me, my Lord, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all the wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Didn't the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hands of the Midian." Now, Gideon's response to the angel was so typically human, wasn't it? He was so skeptical, just like we are sometimes, complaining that if God cared for the Israelites, why was he allowing all those bad things to happen to them? Have you ever wondered the same thing? Have you ever wondered why, if God is so great and if God loves us so much, he would allow so many bad things to happen to us? Now, you'd think that if Gideon was sitting there talking to an angel of God, he'd at least have a little trust that what the angel was saying was true, right? Well, listen to the rest of this conversation. This is Judges 6, verses 14 through 16. The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." Did you hear that? Gideon still didn't believe that God was strong enough to help them. He had faith in God, but his faith was faltering because of the circumstances he was facing. Just like our own faith does sometimes, right? But then we hear this in verse 14. The Lord answered, I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. Now, Scripture tells us that Gideon then made an offering to God, and after that, he and 10 of his servants crept out in the middle of the night and cut down the altar that the Israelites had built to honor Baal. In its place, they built an altar honoring God, and they sacrificed a bull. Well, shortly after that, the Midianites joined forces with the Amalekites, and they began moving closer to Israel. God had Gideon blow a trumpet, signaling for others to join him in battle. Now here's the thing. Even though the angel said that God would be with him, Gideon still wasn't convinced that God was on his side. So he asked for a sign. And here's what he asked. What he did was he told God he was going to leave a sheep's fleece on the threshing room floor overnight. And that if God was really with him, the fleece should have dew on it in the morning, but the floor itself should be dry. And when he checked it in the morning, the fleece was wet and the ground was dry. But that still didn't convince Gideon. So the next night he put another fleece on the floor, and he told God that this time he should make the ground wet, but the fleece should stay dry. And in the morning it was exactly as Gideon had asked. And so finally God was convinced that God was with him. And so finally Gideon was convinced that God was with him and with his army. And so the very next morning Gideon gathered his men together. There were about 32,000 of them, which sounds like a lot of soldiers. But believe it or not, the Midianite army had more than 4 times that many men. The Midianite army numbered 135,000. So it seemed that they would easily overtake Gideon and his army. But listen to what happened. Just as the men were about to enter into battle, God had Gideon ask his men if any of them were afraid. And he told them that anyone who was afraid could leave and go on home, no questions asked. Imagine how Gideon must have felt when 22,000 of his men turned around and went home, leaving him with only 10,000 men to fight against the 135,000 Midianites. But God wasn't done yet. God told Gideon to take his troops to a nearby stream to go and get a drink of water. And as they did, God told Gideon to watch them very carefully. And what he noticed was that 9,700 of the men lay down to drink the water. They lapped it up with their tongue. Now that may not seem like a big deal to us, but Gideon knew why God had asked him to test the men. The problem with them laying down to drink was that it meant they also had to lay down their shields and their swords, making them vulnerable to attack by the Midianites. But on the other hand, the remaining 300 men held on to their swords and shields, simply scooped up handfuls of water, drinking it as they continued to walk. And so Gideon sent the 9,700 men home, leaving him now with only 300 men. Listen to what happened next. This is Judges 7, verses 16 through 21. Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, Gideon placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them, with torches inside. Watch me, he told them. Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp blow yours and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon. Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guard. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew the trumpets and smashed their jars. Grasping the torches in their hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." And while each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. So now the Midianites were on the run. Gideon assumed that they'd run toward their own land, so he sent a messenger ahead of them, asking for 10,000 Israelites to line the sides of the valley leading to the Jordan River. And those men attacked the Midianites as they passed through, killing most of them. Those that got away were chased by Gideon and his 300 men, and many more were killed. After that, the Midianites never again left their home in the desert and never again bothered the Israelites. Now, there's not much more really to Gideon's story. After the battle ended, the Israelites asked Gideon to rule over them, since he had saved them from the Midianites. But Gideon refused, saying that he wouldn't rule over him, and neither would his sons, because God was the real ruler over them. And because of the Midianites stayed away from the Israelites, though, the Israelites were able to live in peace for over 40 years. So what can we learn from Gideon's story? What do we learn from a man whose own faith faltered so much that he chose to put God to the test? Well, there are a lot of lessons here, but I think the most important one for us today is that no matter what's going on in the world, we can trust that God is present with us and that he'll take care of us. We can trust that God is faithful to us and will always see us through no matter what battle we're facing. God proved that to Gideon when he sent him into battle with only 300 men against an army of 135,000. And think how ridiculous it must have seemed to Gideon and to those men to even consider that they could defeat that large of an army. And yet, with God leading them, they were able to defeat the Midianites and bring about peace that lasted for over 40 years. And God didn't just prove his faithfulness to Gideon, he's proving it to us as well, every day as we battle this virus that's changed our lives so drastically. Things are tough right now. We all know that. But look at the good that's come out of this situation. People are reaching out and taking care of each other. People are connecting at home with their families. Families are spending time together, playing games, doing puzzles, reading, talking, rather than just running from one activity to another day after day. People are resting. They're finding new hobbies. They're finding new ways of doing things. People are cooking more, they're cleaning more, they're doing more of the things that make them happy, rather than just blindly going through their days. Folks, I believe with my whole heart that these days apart are a blessing to all of us. And I think that God is using them to show us how faithful he is to all of us, as he provides for us, and as he makes sure that we're okay. I know that some of you have lost your jobs. Some of you have lost loved ones. But many new resources have opened up, and many restrictions have been lifted, all aimed to help those who need it. We may get scared. We may doubt the future. But I promise you that God never doubts. God never quits. And God never turns his back on us. So please don't turn your back on him. He's present. He's able. He's willing to do whatever it takes to make us safe. Now I want to close today by reading a quote to you from Corrie ten Boom, who with her family helped many Jews escape the Holocaust by sheltering them in their home. And I encourage you to remember this quote because I think we need to hear this right now more than ever. Corrie said this: "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God." I want to repeat that because I think it's so important right now to hear it. Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. While our own future may be unknown to us, God knows our present as well as our future, and he's working to bring us good now and forever. Let me close with a prayer. Now may the God of hope fill you all with joy and peace in believing, so that you may abound in